To think you know medieval medicine? The stuff of leeches and questionable herbs? Well, buckle up, because the real care you'd receive from a plague doctor was so much worse than any horror movie dares to show you. We're talking about a terrifying figure in a bird mask whose every cure was more likely to kill you than the Black Death itself. A man who believed bad smells caused disease, and whose treatments involved torturing your body in ways that would make modern serial killers gasp. You're about to discover the shocking realities of plague doctor practices that make even the Grim Reaper look like a gentle nurse. From their bizarre protective gear to their gruesome medical instruments, from their treatment of patients that went beyond mere pain to the grotesque reality of their unscientific methods, these are the facts that will change everything you thought you knew about surviving the plague. Your death sentence often began with a diagnosis. Let's start with the most shocking truth about plague doctors. They were essentially untrained quacks, often failed apothecaries, or even gravediggers, given authority during times of crisis. We're talking about individuals whose knowledge of the human body was laughably, tragically, bad. They weren't university-educated physicians. They were desperate men hired by desperate cities, armed with more superstition than science. The moment they darkened your doorway, you were doomed. Their methods were rooted in the ancient flawed theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, believing that any illness stemmed from an imbalance of these substances. This pseudo-scientific framework gave them license to inflict unspeakable horrors upon their patients, all in the misguided pursuit of balance. Imagine this. You're feverish, your body racked with chills, covered and swollen, black buboes erupting in your armpits, groin, or neck. Each one throbs with agonizing pain, threatening to burst. You can barely move, every joint aches, and the smell of your own sickness is overwhelming. A towering figure enters, his silhouette framed against the dim light, clad in that infamous leather coat, often stiff and crude, smeared with various concoctions. His face is obscured by the beak mask, a terrifying, elongated snout filled with sweet-smelling herbs: lavender, mint, camphor, myrrh, rose petals. Not to protect you, mind you, but to protect him from your bad air or miasma, which he firmly believed was the cause of your illness. He doesn't even want to get too close. He's often holding a wooden cane, not for support, but to poke and prod you from a distance, or to lift your clothes to examine your inflamed skin without direct contact. This cane, often tipped with an ivory knob, was also used to point out instructions to family members or to push away frantic relatives. Your examination would be terrifyingly swift and agonizingly brutal. The doctor wouldn't gently probe your swollen glands. Oh no, he'd poke them, prod them, and likely cut into them with unsterilized tools. These weren't surgical instruments of precision. They were often repurposed knives, crude lancets, or even just sharp pieces of metal, reeking of previous patients' blood and pus. He believed that draining the pus, which was often clotted blood and necrotic tissue, would release the poison from your body. The pain would be excruciating, a searing agony as the cold, dirty blade tore through your inflamed skin and flesh. You'd feel a gush of foul-smelling fluid, but no relief. The risk of secondary infection from his filthy hands, his unwashed tools, and the very air around you was virtually guaranteed. Open wounds in a time before antibiotics in unsanitary homes were a death sentence in themselves. You're bleeding, screaming, and this is just the start of his care. The doctor might even squeeze the wound vigorously, pushing out more of the putrid contents, believing that the more badness he extracted, the better your chances. This process would often be repeated on every single bubo, turning your body into a landscape of open, festering wounds. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but these doctors were often paid per patient diagnosed and treated, creating a macabre incentive to declare as many people plague-ridden as possible. Your cough, your sneeze, even a bad mood, or a minor skin rash could seal your fate. They were often tasked with recording deaths, giving them further power and knowledge of who to target next. Cities, desperate to control the spread, empowered these men with a terrifying authority, allowing them to force their treatments upon terrified families, turning every home into a potential torture chamber. The moment that Beak Mask entered your sick room, your chances of survival plummeted, not because of the plague, but because of its so-called healer. Everyone knows plague doctors used leeches, but the reality of what those poor souls endured goes far beyond a few bloodsuckers. We're talking about medical treatments that were pure, unadulterated torture, designed to extract evil humors or poisons from your already failing body. The underlying philosophy was simple. Disease was an internal corruption, and the only way to expel it was through dramatic, often violent, external intervention. These weren't minor inconveniences. They were procedures that systematically weakened and dehydrated patients already teetering on the brink of death. Take bleeding. This wasn't just a small nick to draw a few ounces. Plague doctors would perform massive bleedings, often using crude, unwashed blades that had been used on countless others. They would make deep incisions into major veins, often in the arm or neck, or use spring-loaded lancets that caused significant trauma. The goal was to drain large quantities of your already precious blood, sometimes until the patient fainted. They believed disease was caused by an imbalance of the body's humors, and bleeding was their go-to solution for everything: fever, pain, delirium, even simple indigestion. You were already weak, severely dehydrated from fever and vomiting, and they'd leave you even weaker, dangerously anemic, lightheaded, and prone to fainting or going into shock, essentially accelerating your journey to the grave. Imagine the scene: buckets of your own blood, darkened and clotted, being shown to your family as proof that the poison was leaving your body, while your strength ebbed away with every drop. The faint smell of iron and decay would linger in the air long after the doctor departed, leaving you even more vulnerable to the disease. But here's the truly sick part. They'd apply horrifyingly painful cautery. Imagine a red-hot iron, glowing angrily in the dim light of your sick room, directly applied to your buboes or other afflicted areas to burn out the disease. The raw, searing pain would be unimaginable, an agony that would make you scream until your throat was raw. The smell of your own burning flesh would fill the room, a sickening stench of charred skin and hair. The resulting burns would become massive, weeping, infected wounds, perfect breeding grounds for gangrene, tetanus, and further sepsis. This was their twisted idea of sterilization and purification, using fire to cleanse a body already battling a systemic infection. Sometimes they'd apply a caustic paste made from lye or other corrosive chemicals, which would slowly eat away at your flesh, causing excruciating chemical burns over days. These weren't swift, merciful acts. They were protracted agonies designed to draw out the disease, leaving you a maimed, agonizing shell of your former self. Catherine, a fictional patient, was given a mercury cure. This wasn't some gentle application of a diluted compound. Doctors would make patients ingest large amounts of elemental mercury, or rub large quantities of a mercury paste onto their skin, often directly over the buboes, believing it would purify them and draw out the infection. The reality? Acute mercury poisoning, a slow, agonizing descent into madness and death. You'd experience violent vomiting, excruciating abdominal cramps, bloody diarrhea, and severe neurological damage. Your teeth would loosen and fall out, your hair would fall in clumps, your gums would bleed, and you'd suffer from tremors, convulsions, and intense hallucinations. Your kidneys and liver would fail, leading to a truly agonizing demise from multi-organ failure. You'd be trembling uncontrollably, hallucinating wildly, and still, the plague doctor would insist it was the cure working, a sign that the mercury was battling the internal evil, even as your body shut down from the toxic overload. The very substance meant to heal became the instrument of a torturous, slow execution. Here's something that will blow your mind. They sometimes even prescribed a mixture of dried toad and treacle, a type of molasses, as an antidote. Yes, you heard that right. A dead, dried amphibian, often ground into a powder, mixed with a sweet, sticky syrup and forced down your throat. The reasoning was rooted in sympathetic magic. The toad, being a creature of the earth, was believed to draw out the earth-born disease. The placebo effect was nil, but the disgust factor was off the charts. You'd be gagging, fighting against the vile concoction, your stomach already churning with fever and pain. Other cures involved drinking concoctions made from a pulverized horn of a unicorn, usually a narwhal tusk, powdered emeralds, or even dissolved pearls. Costly, desperate measures that did nothing but enrich the fraudulent healers. The worst part is that these cures had absolutely no scientific basis. They were based on superstition, fear, and a complete misunderstanding of disease, turning the healing process into a prolonged, horrific ordeal that expedited death rather than preventing it. These were not doctors attempting to save lives. They were desperate men performing desperate acts, often ensuring a more painful and prolonged demise than the plague itself might have inflicted. If you think their direct interventions were bad, wait until you hear about a plague doctor's other daily remedies. This wasn't just ineffective medicine. It was a festival of the bizarre, designed more to scare off evil spirits than to help a living human being. The underlying belief in miasma, or bad air, as the root cause of disease, led to some truly outlandish and often dangerous prescriptions, turning your home into a toxic environment on top of your failing health. These were not cures, but elaborate, often costly, rituals that prolonged suffering and hastened death. Plague doctors often recommended strange and dangerous atmospheric purifications. They believed the plague was spread by invisible, foul-smelling vapors emanating from decaying matter, swamps, or even sick people themselves. So they'd order houses to be filled with smoke from burning herbs, strong-smelling ones like rosemary, juniper, and rue, but also more noxious substances like brimstone, sulfur, or even gunpowder. Imagine being sick, struggling to breathe, your lungs already compromised by fever and infection, and then having your entire living space deliberately filled with thick, acrid smoke that burns your eyes and chokes your throat. This wasn't just an unpleasant experience. It would often exacerbate respiratory issues, trigger coughing fits, and could even cause accidental fires in tightly packed medieval homes, adding the terrifying prospect of being burned alive to your list of woes. The smoke, far from purifying the air, would simply make it harder to breathe and fill your lungs with irritating particulates, further weakening your already fragile immune system. They might also advise placing bowls of vinegar or strong-smelling resins around the room, hoping the potent aromas would somehow cleanse the air, all while ignoring basic hygiene. But here's where it gets truly bizarre: urine therapy. Doctors would routinely recommend that patients not only drink their own urine, but also take baths in it, believing it had cleansing and antiseptic properties. Imagine the sheer revulsion, the taste, the smell, the utter degradation of being forced to consume your own bodily waste, or worse, to lie in a tub of it, all while your body screamed for actual clean water, rest, and nourishment. The thought alone is enough to induce nausea. Beyond the psychological torment, consuming urine, especially from a sick individual, could introduce new pathogens or simply worsen dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. This wasn't just a gross act. It was actively detrimental to a patient's already compromised health. The man also had the strangest protective rituals. Every interaction with a patient was filled with ritualistic gestures, chanting, and the liberal application of bizarre poultices and amulets. These poultices were concoctions of anything from crushed emeralds, believed to absorb poison, to dried human excrement. Yes, you heard that right. Feces, often from a healthy person, though how they verified healthy in a plague-ridden city is anyone's guess, mixed with honey or other binders, and then applied directly to your buboes or open wounds. This created an almost guaranteed route for severe bacterial infection, turning a localized bubo into a systemic sepsis. They might also instruct patients to wear amulets containing arsenic or powdered mummies, further exposing them to dangerous substances. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but plague doctors often carried posies of flowers, not just in their beaks, but in their hands, vigorously sniffing them when approaching a patient. This practice, while seeming quaint, highlights their fundamental misunderstanding of disease transmission. They believed the sweet smell would ward off the bad air of the plague, rather than realizing the disease was spread by fleas on rats or via airborne droplets. This meant your final moments were often spent inhaling strong floral scents, mixed with the inescapable stench of your own disease, the putrid remedies being applied, and the lingering odor of the doctor's previous, equally doomed patients. The truly insane part? Even as thousands died around them, and their cures demonstrably failed to stop the relentless march of the Black Death, these doctors kept applying more and more extreme measures. They were convinced that their perceived authority, often granted by city officials or some twisted belief in their own divine insight, somehow made them immune to the consequences of their gluttony for suffering. They doubled down on their disastrous treatments, sometimes escalating to physical restraint of patients who, in their delirium, refused the cure, turning healing into an act of forceful torment. The bizarre and grotesque remedies were a testament to human desperation and scientific ignorance, where the cure was often as terrible as the disease itself. You'd think a plague doctor's reign of terror would end with your inevitable death, right? Wrong. This man of medicine was so committed to being a disaster that even your corpse managed to cause absolute mayhem, and his methods influenced generations of suffering, casting a long dark shadow over the future of medicine. The final chapter of the plague doctor's involvement was often just as horrific as their care, extending their legacy of torment beyond the living. Let's start with your final moments. As you lay dying, your body ravaged by fever, struggling for breath, every muscle aching, the plague doctor would often perform one last horrifying act, bloodletting for the dying. Believing that a final purge of bad humors was necessary to give the soul peace, or to completely drain the poison from the body, they would often perform a final, drastic bloodletting. This wasn't for recovery. It was a ritualistic act. Ensure death was hastened and as traumatic as possible. Already on the precipice of eternity, your lifeblood would be intentionally drained, leaving you colder, weaker, and ensuring your heart eventually sputtered to a halt from lack of volume. The final sight you might have was not a comforting loved one, but this terrifying, masked figure, his beak still pointed at you, presiding over your agonizing demise, convinced he was performing a final necessary service. Your last conscious sensation might be the cold slice of the lancet and the warmth of your own life pouring out. But wait, it gets so much worse. Your death was merely a problem of disposal for the plague doctor. He'd often be responsible for reporting your death and ensuring your body was quickly removed. Due to the sheer volume of deaths, especially during peak outbreaks, individual burials became impossible. Bodies were often piled high in mass graves, sometimes crudely covered with quicklime, burned in pyres, or hastily buried in shallow pits. With little dignity, the very doctor, who cared for you was also the one ushering you into an unmarked communal pit, stripping away any last vestiges of human respect. Families often had to bribe these doctors or their assistants to ensure even a minimal acknowledgement of their loved one's passing, or to avoid having the body simply left on the street. Here's a detail that will haunt your dreams. In some desperate cases, with cities utterly overwhelmed and learning nothing from their failed treatments, plague doctors would even suggest or participate in the dissection of fresh corpses to try and understand the disease. Imagine waking up dead, only for your body to be unceremoniously cut open by the very person who failed to save you, often with little to no anatomical knowledge, just morbid curiosity. These were not systematic scientific autopsies. They were crude, often public, vivisections of the recently deceased, sometimes performed in makeshift settings. The organs would be crudely examined, theories about corruption or putrefaction debated, and then the remains disposed of. It was a final violation, a desperate, unscientific attempt to gain insight, which rarely led to any useful medical advancement, but further desecrated the dead. The chaos didn't end there. For years afterward, the fear of the plague doctor and his methods lingered in the collective consciousness. Their very image became synonymous with death and suffering. Their legacy wasn't just the millions dead, but the deep-seated distrust in medicine that took centuries to overcome. People reported nightmares, terrible omens, and the memory of the beat death coming for them, even long after the outbreaks subsided. Some claimed it was their ghost, haunting the streets of the ravaged cities, but historians think it was probably just the lingering psychological trauma of enduring such horrific tear, combined with the very real smells and sights of rampant death. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but the medical practices of the plague doctor era set back anatomical and surgical knowledge for generations. Their reliance on ancient flawed theories, combined with their lack of scientific method and disdain for empirical observation, meant that true medical progress was stifled. Their unscientific methods and superstitions became so deeply ingrained that it took the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods for genuine, evidence-based medicine to begin to emerge from the shadow of their deadly ignorance. So there you have the real plague doctor, not just a spooky figure in a mask, but a walking disaster whose care betrayed you as dramatically as the disease itself. A figure so consumed by superstition and ignorance that he turned one of humanity's greatest crises into his personal horror show. The man sworn to heal became a harbinger of agony, and even death couldn't erase his capacity for causing absolute chaos. His legacy isn't just the terrifying bird mask. It's a masterclass in how absolute desperation and unchecked authority can turn human beings into something genuinely monstrous in the name of healing. If these disturbing medical facts made you question everything you thought you knew about history, maybe hit that subscribe button, because there are plenty more horrifying truths that textbooks conveniently leave out. And trust me, you haven't heard anything yet.